inviting PM whenever you're ready.
Starting on speech in 3, 2, 1. So, in today's world, it's the 21st century, climate change has been worsening, and we can see that the things that have been done to solve this problem are constantly pushed by younger people in the world, which are the people who will be the ones living in this world as time passes. So, firstly, there are a few things I'll include in my speech. I'll be starting out with my setup, my characterization, and then I'll move on to my arguments and my impacts. So firstly, on with my case setup. On our side, the burden of proof is to prove why teenagers have a higher incentive to push for change and why they can do it better. So in order for side opposition to win this debate, they have to prove to us why having an extra voice that can push for environmental policies that can literally save the world is bad. And they have to prove why older politicians have the incentive to push for environmental change. I'll be moving on to my characterizations. So what does it look like for teens to be consulted and allowed in referenda? What is a referendum, first of all? So a referenda is when an electorate or normal everyday citizens of voting age who vote on policies. And in the status quo, currently politicians aren't doing anything for the green movement or for the environment. Therefore, we need a referendum. And what does it look like for teens to be consulted or allowed to vote? The green movement is actively recruiting and consulting teens, means that these teenagers are making informed decisions when they are being consulted by professionals, and this allows the teenagers to vote despite not being of age. And for my second characterization are the environmental policies. So what are these policies? For example, they are the mandatory corporate sustainability, policies to lower carbon emissions, etc., or trying to have people be more sustainable. And who does these policies affect? They affect everyone, and more importantly, the teenagers. So I'll be moving on with my third characterization, which are the older generation and the younger generation. So the older people or politicians, they are about 50 to 60 years old, and firstly, they are more prone to climate change denial. There are things that they refuse to acknowledge about the environment because they have been around longer, and they think that climate change is a natural occurrence. Because some of them think that think extreme weather is just the earth changing, and they think of it as a lower priority. And secondly, they're more prone to media distrust. They're more skeptical to what the news reports on climate change. And third, they have a more old mindset. They think that these policies may infringe on their rights. For example, they think the government is just trying to force them to use electrical cars. That's why they don't think of it as like something serious. They just think of it as a natural occurrence. And fourth, they have a lack of experience on environmental policies. Dealing with environmental policies it's a relatively new thing to deal with for them, as we just started to know that we must do something about the environment. So it does not outweigh the experience that teenagers have, because they've been living, although older people have been living in this world longer, they haven't faced any environmental or climate change problem when they were younger. Therefore, they just started, this is a relatively new thing to them. And lastly, rejected, they don't have formal education on environmental policies, because they usually only hear from the news, but they distrust that. And for the younger generation, which are our future generation, where climate change is going to affect the most, they have had formal education on these environmental issues. There are school curriculums that emphasize on these issues compared to the older generation who never learned in school. And they are more known to be active activists in the status quo, and they are more open-minded, and we can't deny that, because they are more accepting of newer ideas compared to the older people. And therefore, they have a higher incentive to push for change. Now, moving on to my first argument. My first argument is that younger people often bring fresher ideas and innovative solutions to climate change, to environmental change. So I have a few layers to this. My first layer is that the problem in status quo right now is that the older generation is generally more conservative, and they believe less in climate change, as I said earlier. They think it's a natural occurrence because they've lived here for longer, and they are just in like a climate change denial. And most politicians in the party are composed of older generations, which are bad because they are more conservative, and they are less likely to push for environmental change. And what does this look like? This looks like they're taking a longer time to pass these policies, and these policies don't even get voted fast because of many of these politicians don't prioritize these environmental change policies. And for my second I'll finish my speech first. For my second layer is the analysis. So I have a few layers to this too. First layer is that the incentives of the young people or their likelihood. So younger people are more educated. They learn more about climate change in the curriculum. For example, they learn geography or the youth green movements. And for example, back in the day, there's no such thing as environmental clubs. But now we can see that there are a lot of environmental clubs that exist. This shows how the youth are the ones who are actually doing something about climate change, and they're actively trying to help the environment. And there's also green movement that actively influences young people, because young people are very active on social media. Young people are the ones who often push for societal change. For example, the Black Lives Matter movement, Palestine versus Israel, and human rights in general. This proves that in status quo, it's already evident and that young people are the ones who push for change, and therefore we have proof that young people have more incentive for environmental change. And for my second layer to this is that why young people have better ideas, because they are more open to new ideas, they are willing to try new things. And they're not stuck on their own mindset, and their mindset is not constricted by some old or outdated ideas. For example, some older people think that plastic is not harmful, but of course, obviously young people who are educated don't think so. And younger people are more innovative because they are highly knowledgeable, more than the older generations. So I'll move on to my impacts. So my first impact is that young people are more likely to push for change, because as you can see in the status quo right now, the reason why the environmental change takes so long to pass through is because of these politicians who are in the older generation. And therefore, younger people who are more active have more incentive to help climate change. And my second impact is that it will be more effective because it will lead to a faster change, as the older generation is not doing anything. And we clearly see that by looking at the status quo right now. And with that, I end the speech. Thank you.
I think PM, I think along a bit already. I have to move there because I need to charge my laptop. It's fine.
May I get a minute to?
A minute of watching, around 20 seconds. Yeah.
20 seconds. Still recording. I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Side government is like a huge faulty net. It is big and they threw it into the ocean, expecting to catch some fishes. This is just like their points. They threw all of these sentences, yet it caught nothing. There was no explanation, there was no reasoning, there was nothing to back up their points. All they said was what? Oh, these older generations, oh, they're in denial, they're bad, okay? Yet they don't give us any proof how they are bad, or even if they did give any proof, they were also like shallow, alright? So first of all, so today I as leader of opposition will be rebutting the points of the Prime Minister as well as giving a point of my own. So let's start with my rebuttals, alright? So first thing to note of was that the Prime Minister has separated these citizens or these people into different groups, or they based it off like some political stuff. But in reality, aren't we in a democracy? If we're in a democracy, right, shouldn't we count everyone as one united body? Why would you guys split? Why would you side government split the younger generations as teenagers? Why would you only talk about these teenagers and old political figures, these between 50s, 60s, like that? What happened to all these fresh graduates? Where do you lump them? They have matured enough and they are also of legal age, yet they are also part of the younger generations. Why have you guys not addressed this issue at all? Now, next off, so we will never wish to silence the younger generation. Teenagers are still allowed to make their opinions through different media platforms and debates like what we are doing right now. So they are still allowed to exercise their freedom of speech through social medias and other forms of media. Alright? Now, moving on to my point. So, these younger generations, we as an opposition believe that these younger generations are less experienced compared to the older generations. Older generations have more experience and education when it comes to this topic. This also ties back to one of the observations that I have made. It is that side government has stated that this older generation, these people, they don't have formal education. They didn't get all these green movement. They didn't get all these geography education. Well, I think that is false. They have sufficient education regarding this topic. And plus, why are you stating that these older generations, they are not capable to study anymore? Are you stating that younger generations are just better than the older generations? No, I feel that is very biased, and I feel that is very one-sided. So, older generations, they can study too. Yes?
How are they going to get that environmental education? From where, and why do they actively seek it out?
Okay. To answer your POI, I feel like this is actually very easy. There is a very easy explanation to that. So, if the younger generations are able to go for tuitions, or they're able to learn online through all these kind of platforms like YouTube or any other media platforms, then why can't the older generations do so? And it also affects them. They are still living on this earth. Why are you saying that they do not even think about it at all? Why do you say that why do you state it in which you are talking about how the older generations totally disregard the well-being of the earth, of the environment? No, they still do. Of course, they seek this kind of knowledge, this new knowledge. Okay, so they are still able to gain They are still able to gain knowledge. They are still able to learn about these environments and these environmental friendly things. So moving on. This also ties back to one of the points that the Prime Minister has given. Although you may say that new generations have fresh ideas, these may be dangerous moves that may only work in a fantasy setting. The teenagers might be able to propose new and innovative ideas, but what comes after? most teenagers may not think of the long-term implications, while older generations or more experienced generations, they are able to think the whole entire plan through. They are able to carry out it to the best of their abilities, and they are able to carry out to the end. Alright? Now, we as side opposition want adults to be the ones that are making the core decisions, because we have trust in their experience and on their experience on this earth and everything that they have been through and they have witnessed. Not only in regards to environmental issues, but this also ties into politics, the state of the economy, and the future generations. So, with that, I would like to end my speech. Is there any other POIs? No? Alright, thank you.
I think hello inviting DPM already.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. As the Earth's temperature continues to rise, fueling more intense storms and extreme weather, scientists are calling for immediate action to address climate change. Side opposition's world would be like the status quo currently, where environmental policies take forever to pass, for example, like how mandatory corporate sustainability still haven't had proper policies to enforce it. We see that this is a world where environmental policies aren't properly passed through, and this is the world we exactly oppose. Whereas we say that in our world, we are better able to have immediate action by providing an extra voice and an extra push for these environmental policies. 2 things I'll do in my speech. First of all, I give my responses to the LO, and I'll be providing the best case and disproving their best case. First of all, they say that these fresh graduates can still push for political change, and that we shouldn't divide them into older people, teenagers, or something like that. But then let me tell you first of all why this is untrue. We say that because the older people are more likely to vote within these referendums, and when they do that, they are most likely to outwin these fresh graduates. And even if the number of fresh graduates are always going to be outnumbered by the number of older people or older generation who has that climate change denial mindset. We would flip this argument and say that currently the only group of people that is actually actively advocating for climate change are these fresh graduates. How are this group of people able to actually push for proper environmental policies when they only have such a small number to begin with? Whereas on our world, our fresh graduates and our teen voices, as my first speaker has said, are able to help push these policies and provide an extra voice and are allowed to vote, and therefore are better able to actually have these policies manifest. Secondly, they say that teenagers have a lack of experience, but I'll prove to you why it is untrue that experience would suddenly lead to better environmental policies. Now, as we have stated just now, politicians do not have experience with environmental policies. They did not have to, for example, when they were in the 20s and 30s, back in the 1990s or the 2000s, climate change or environmental policies weren't something you had to advocate or something you had to push for last time, or it wasn't something that the older generation had to deal with in general. They didn't have to vote for this in general, right? Therefore, we say that since it's a relatively new experience and it only came about or gain attention or gain awareness that we need to pass these environmental policies, it only started coming about in the more recent years, like for example 2015 or 2016, where our teenagers still exist. And when we say that during this time, where the older generation did not get a formal education about it, where they did not learn about this in schools, or they didn't have their mindset developed from a young age, we say that our teenagers are better to push for these environmental policies because, for number one, when they were taught about environmental policies since a much younger age, when their brains are still developing, they're more accepting and more absorbent of the information that climate change is very harmful. And secondly, we also say that these younger people, they have had a lot of active involvement in their clubs and active clubs that help them be more involved in these climate change policies. We also say that thirdly, they have social media that constantly pushes it and rubs it in their face when they use it every day that, hey, the climate is dying, look at the glaciers, they're dying, look at the polar bears are dying. Everyone's talking about this in social media, and they're constantly reminded of this day by day as they scroll through their phone as a normal teenager. Therefore, we say that since they're more exposed, and because they have an emphasis on this kind of curriculum, we say that because of this, they are actually the ones that have more experience if you look at it comparatively, compared to an older generation who had not had a formal education, compared to teenagers who most of their lives they're learning about this environment during their classes. Thirdly, they said that environmental education is still accessible to these older generations. But let me prove to you as to why it is unlikely for these older people to actively seek out these environmental information. So first of all, they never properly tell us incentives of these politicians or older people to actually seek out or let's take a POI.
Okay, so you say that environmental policies in school started in 2015 to 2016.
Yeah.
What about people that graduate in high school in like 2018? They've already learned about this and then they go on uni. And then after uni, how do you classify them under younger generation or older generation?
So technically, yes, they are the younger generation. They're the fresh graduates, correct? So that's a smaller number of people. Let's say they are part of the age group of 20 to 30-year-olds, right? Compared to the older generation that is probably around 40 or until 60 or 70, correct? That is a much larger age group, or a much larger age group that has not been exposed to environmental policies or environmental topics. Therefore, because there is a much larger group of people not as exposed, we say that if we expand our age group from 20 to 40 or 20 to 30 to 15 to 40, we say that we're able to push our age group and push the actual voices pushing for environmental policies more, and therefore we are better able to achieve that on our side of the world. Whereas you guys have a smaller number of people actually pushing for it. If you see that your fresh graduates are going to push for it, then technically you have a smaller number of people, because the amount of people that graduated in 2018 aren't a lot, correct? Thirdly, let me continue my speech as to why it is not in the incentive of these politicians or older people to actually search up environmental information. Like my auntie or my grandma or my mom wouldn't actively go out of their way to let me start a research paper on climate change. Whereas, for example, for the younger generation, they have to constantly do assignments, they have to do research papers, they have to actually actively look into information and fact check this stuff. But rather, the older generation, their main source of information, as we said just now, is mainly from the media. And we have proved to you why climate change denial is actually a really real thing, because it has been acknowledged as a form of science, correct? And because the older generation has been known to be more stubborn due to their belief that these media, they think that these news sources or that these media actually have some hidden incentive or hidden mind to them, or they think that climate scientists actually have some kind of hidden motive behind them. We say that because of this kind of mindset that a lot of older generations have that you cannot deny is something that will actually cause harm. Therefore, I proudly propose an asset. Thank you.
PM, yellow, and availability.
I might speak a bit softer. That's okay. Okay. My speech will start in 3, 2, 1. Chair, it is nigh impossible to conceive how side government so foolishly wants to endanger the future of the country just so a few minorities can vote. They actively do not consider the majority in their debate, and they only consider like a few teenagers who are actually interested in climate change and environmental policies. So today, my speech will consist of 3 rebuttals and 2 points, how to propose. So starting my rebuttals, first, they claim that these teenagers' voices should be heard, and that like they have to be able to vote for these policies. And we agree that their voices should be heard. We love that teenagers want to push for these ideals. What we do not agree is that even though there may be a small portion of teenagers, let's say 1,000 teenagers, that actively care about the environment, that actively want to like change the environment, there's going to be like 100,000 other teenagers that just don't really care, right? Then they're just going to like go and simply vote, then they're going to screw up the votes. So we believe that we already have a lot of platforms such as like social media, this debate. Teenagers are able to like say their ideals. They're able to have free speech. We love that they can have free speech. We want them to have free speech. We want them to be able to say what they think. What we do not want is for these other teenagers that do not care to go and screw up the votes. So moving on to my second rebuttal. So they say that these policies to lower carbon emissions, to like increase the green tax, they say that it will affect everyone. This is again true. It affects everyone. So why do we want these teenagers that are actually unable to make decisions for themselves? They are making emotional decisions instead of rational decisions. They do not fully consider the long-term weights of what they are actually going to vote for. And I'll address this in my first point. Okay, so moving on to my third rebuttal. So they say that fresh graduates, like according to them between the age of 20 to 30, they are outnumbered by these old people, old politicians who don't really care. So first of all, it's not just old politicians voting. We have everyone of legal age in a democracy are able to vote. It's not just politicians or teenagers. Everyone can vote of legal age. So again, they claim that these fresh uni graduates are vastly outnumbered by these old people who don't care. And even if they push for change, the old people who don't really care don't really push for this. But is this not true on the other side? So fresh uni graduates, 20 to 30, even if they go and vote, they're also outnumbered by a lot of like other teenagers that maybe they don't join environmental clubs. Because let's face it, there's not actually a lot of people that want to join environmental clubs. There are other clubs that are a lot more popular. Not every single teenager is actually really going to push for the environment. So on both sides, the fresh uni graduates are outnumbered either by the old people or the teenagers. And we would rather that only the like people of legal age who have actually fully matured, actually fully considered what they are voting for, actually considered the long-term like outcomes of their like voting. We do not want that, right? We only want people of legal age to be able to vote. So now I'll move on to my point. So firstly, the teenagers may not have full exposure to the topic and they do not understand the full weight of the environmental policy that they're voting for. So what do I mean by this? So firstly, teenagers are unable to properly identify the long-term outcomes of a major pressing issue. So they simply lack a fundamental understanding of the world. Because they are still maturing and growing. As you said, their brains are still developing. Just because they may be like, they may go and see the environmental policy, it doesn't mean they fully understand, right? Because when you vote for a tax or you vote for a policy to be introduced, there's actually a lot of other implications to it, which I'll address later. So, how can we place the burden of a national issue on their shoulders? Like, a teenager isn't really going to care about the environmental policy to a great degree, right? Or at least majority of teenagers are not going to. So, if I'm just going to go for, I'm just going to make a random or misinformed, like if I'm just an average teenager, I'm just going to go make a random or misinformed vote, because I just want to go about my day, right? I don't really care about what's happening. And so like, even if I've learned about it in school, I'm not really gonna go and research, because let's face it, what we learn in school is actually not enough when you weigh it against like the long-term implications, such as like when you increase the tax, then if a company has a higher carbon tax, then the product they sell also has to be higher, right? Then because of that, the products will be higher, the cost of living will be higher, and then as a result, the cost of living will increase. Then if governments, like, if they enforce more taxes, then the people also have to pay more taxes. Long term, right, it's not very beneficial to either the teenagers or their families or the like older generation if like you just have to pay more because the teenagers themselves do not fully consider what happens when they vote. So even if we take the government's best case scenario, where a decent portion of teenagers are able to make accurate decisions, this still falls to our worst case scenario. So on our side, even if there are going to be adults who don't care, the proportion of those who don't care is obviously going to be less than that of like teenagers who don't care, right? Because on both sides there are obviously going to be people that don't care. But the proportion of adults that don't care to the adults that do care, compared to the proportion of teenagers that don't care compared to those that do care, it's obviously like more adults are gonna care about the environment than teenagers, right? Because the teenagers, well, you have to understand, they have their own like emotional decisions. They don't actually like think about it. So Thai government has to understand that adults who have already passed uni are obviously going to make more rational decisions, right? They have more life experience, they are more educated, and thus they are more likely to make decisions fully based on the betterment of the country. So Thai government needs to prove how 1,000 teenagers who really care about the environment can like mitigate the like long-term drawbacks of like 100,000 teenagers who just don't care and will screw up the votes. Again, they also have to understand that teenagers' ideals hold significantly less weight compared to that of an adult. So why is this true? So on my second point, teenagers are largely going to base decisions on their emotional side instead of rationalizing it. As a teen, I'm more likely to make decisions based on what I want rather than what is better for the country. Whereas as an adult, I have my family to worry about. Obviously, it's in my best interest to make decisions that like fully benefit the country, right? This is my nation, my home that I will be spending the foreseeable future in. It's in my best interest to ensure that the country is in good state for my kids and my future generation. I do not want my kids to have to grow up paying like an exorbitantly high amount of taxes, right? Obviously, I want a like good living condition for them. If the teenagers do not fully understand what they are voting for, then they're not going to like make decisions that can fully help the country. So on my second point, teenagers like hardly understand what is the best for themselves. One more to say, what's the best for the country? This is the same reason why we do not allow teenagers to like drink and drive, etc. They don't actually like fully consider what is even in their best interest. One more to say the like country. One more to say other people. They don't actually like fully consider themselves. So why do you think they're not given full autonomy before legal age? It's because they need like guardians to ensure that they don't do stupid stuff, right? Okay, before I end my speech, any POIs?
You can't talk about POIs.
Oh yeah, never mind, sorry. I'm a bit sick, sorry. Okay. What we as side opposition want to do is create a world where teenagers are allowed to express their free will, they are allowed to express their ideals. We just don't want the other like 100,000 teenagers to go and screw up the votes. And we want decisions that can fully benefit the country long term. With this, I end my speech. Thank you.
I think the law manipulating the output of
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. We tell you that teenagers are the ones who should be given a voice because they are better informed in the first place, and we're going to prove you why. So 3 things in my speech today, right? Number 1, the responses towards the previous speaker of side opposition. Number 2, I'll state the clashes and say why we weigh over them. And number 3, prove why we win this debate, right? So firstly, on the responses. Deputy Leader of Opposition tells us that only a small number of teenagers actually care about the environment in the first place and who will actually actively go and do research and whatnot, right? But my first speaker has already characterized in her speech that if this policy passes, if teenagers are given this referenda, this voice, right, then obviously when a referendum does happen, the Green Movement, other organizations like Sarawak, Eco Warriors and whatnot, they will actively go out and recruit these young people, these teenagers, and teach them information and make them well informed. There are already existing organizations that will have the incentive to go out and educate, right? So and therefore we tell you that these young people, we've already characterized them, and it's also a fact that the younger generation, they are just generally more open-minded, so they're easier to influence. And if schools also take up the responsibility to educate them and to tell them about how urgent climate change is, then I'm sure that this issue is easily mitigated. Yes, I'll take a POI.
As previously mentioned before, you said that they are all these organizations, they provide this information, they provide all these, they teach these younger generations. But how are you so sure that they will actually carry out these information that are taught, and they will actually like care? Because all you said is they get information, yet.
Okay, I get what you mean. Because obviously these organizations, what are their purpose? Their purpose is to solve climate change, right? Obviously, and these organizations, they have the incentive to seek out these younger generations. For example, they can partner up with schools, they can have youth training programs, they can use social media to promote themselves and actively recruit people in, because they know the younger generations are the one pressing for change, right? Just now in the hall, we saw that the Sarawak Eco Warriors, they have youth training programs. Why don't they have older generation programs? Because they know it's harder to convince older generation to push for change. Therefore, they're doing youth programs in the first place, right? Okay, moving on to my second response, right? Opposition questions why we only let teenagers have votes and we don't have fresh graduates, we don't have the people in their 20s included, right? And we tell you that no one is like excluding them from actually wanting to push for change, right? They can still voice out their stuff, they can still participate in they can still participate in like organizations that do things to help the climate change, right? However, we tell you that these fresh grads, these 20s, they don't have much of a voice in status quo anyways, right? At the end of the day, we tell you it's always the older generation who's going to outvoice us because they are the ones who hold power in the state in the first place, right? So now that we're pulling in teenagers, we're pulling in an extra voice into the younger, the category of the younger generation, and we're also emphasizing on teenagers because we tell you that like a 16-year-old teenager compared to a 25-year-old working adult, at the end of the day, a 16-year-old teenager has less voice than that 25-year-old working adult, right? So this policy is able to actually give these 16-year-olds a voice in status quo. Okay, moving on to the last response, right? They tell us that teenagers are going to be misinformed on our side, right? However, we already proved to you that this is unlikely to happen because number one, I've already stated about the organizations, about the youth training programs, them actively seeking out younger people. Number two, about schools. Schools will educate these people. There's already like environment clubs and whatnot. And number three, about discussions, right? Because whenever there's a vote, obviously there's going to be discussions about it, either on social media or between friend groups, right? Like when you walk into class, people are going to be talking about it. Your teachers are going to be talking about it to you, right? So obviously, they're not going to be misinformed because everyone will be discussing and sharing their opinions on it. No, thank you. Moving on to my clashes, right? So firstly, on policies, who can actually make policies, right? Who can actually make better policies? Side government, we claim that the younger people are more innovative and they have fresher ideas. Side opposition claims that old people can think more thoroughly and think about the long-term implications, right? So what is the comparison here? We need to first talk about the likelihood of both of these things, right? So we tell you that the incentives of young people, they are better educated, they have programs that reach out to them and educate them, they have more awareness because of discussions that happen, and also because of their curriculum, they have more knowledge on the topic. They have geography classes, they have like robotics class, they have coding class. All of this can help them make better policies, right? They're more innovative and they're more innovative and they are more educated on these topics. However, we tell you that the incentives of politicians, some of these politicians are in denial because climate change wasn't a problem when these politicians were younger, right? Back in the 90s, it wasn't really talked about. It's only prevalent now in status quo, right? So, and we heard that these politicians have other priorities, other things that they want to focus on. For example, poverty. We tell you that it's still important, but obviously, environment is also important. Climate change is also important because it involves the younger generation. And these politicians will always put environment last, and this is a bad thing. Therefore, that's why we push for allowing the teenagers to actually do things, right? But even if you don't buy this, what is the comparison between the quality of these policies, right? Because these young people, they are more educated. My second speaker has told you they do research, they do assignments on these topics, they write essays, right? They have classes, they have clubs, and they just know things, they have more knowledge than these older generations. However, the old people, they were not educated on these things when they were younger, so we heard that the younger people are likely to make better and more well-informed policies. Some opposition claims that we don't think about the long-term impacts, right? First of all, they didn't prove why these politicians are able to think of the long-term impacts in the first place, because we tell you that if these politicians can't even make good policies, how are they going to think about the impacts in the first place? But even if we buy that, right, we tell you that these teenagers are not stupid, like we are all teenagers, and we're still debating about taxes and implications education, we tell you that our education has improved to a point where these teenagers have the capacity to think about these implications in the first, at the end of the day, right? But lastly, if you still don't buy that, on the clash of urgency, right? Because climate change is such a serious and pressing issue, it cannot be neglected anymore, right? On opposition, the older generation, it's very hard for them to actually pass policies because it will take such a long time. They're gonna be in denial, so they can't actually get change fast on their side. With that, I end my speech. Thank you.
Jane, got good on work whenever you're ready.
My speech will start in 3, 2, 1. Okay, first of all, on side opposition, we tell you why we want the older generation to make most of the core decisions that will be passing policies and votes to pass these policies, right? And we tell you why, because we think that since side government says that these younger generations may have fresher ideas because they have formal education and that they are highly knowledgeable and know more than the older generation, and thus this makes them better decision makers. But we think this is wrong because you say they have social media, they have this formal education, they have to make research papers because they are assigned to make these research papers. But you also contradict yourself when you say that social media is pushing these issues in their face, because you are acting as if the older generation, like our parents are the older generations, you're acting as if they also do not have social media. And as you said, it is pushed in their faces. So the older generations also do not or cannot ignore these issues also. You cannot tell me that the older generation rejected. You cannot tell me that the older generation does not hold these discussions because they are also concerned about it. You do not prove why they are also not concerned. They even, more so, they should be more concerned because they are the ones being directly affected. These climate changes, they will not only affect themselves, they will affect their children and their grandchildren, and these policies, they think better about these policies because they are not only thinking about the environment, but they are also thinking about how this will affect the political world and how this will affect the state of the economy. Because as my Deputy Leader of Opposition said, certain policies will have implications on how tax is being carried out, like how they will collect the taxes. Some things will inflate because, for example, if the younger generation votes for higher green tax on big companies because they have high carbon emissions, so since these companies have to pay such a large amount of green tax, right, then there will be inflation of certain products because they have to pay more, and so we also have to pay more. And the older generations do not want that to happen. They do not want such a huge inflation. They do not want the economy to go down, right? So we are thinking about the future. We are thinking about the bigger picture instead of just looking at the climate change in hand. Obviously, the older generation also cares about climate change. They also, obviously, they don't want the world to go burning down, right? They also care about climate change, but they also have to take into consideration what else will happen shall these policies pass. The younger generation has not experienced what they have to go through when they are of legal age. What they have to go through, they haven't had to worry about to feed themselves. They haven't had to worry about increased prices because right now, who's taking care of all their issues? It's their parents. So they only care. You say they will think more about these policies and the environment, right? But they do not look at the bigger picture, as I've mentioned many times before. So you also say that they have to do like research papers and stuff, but like research papers in university, where do they get this information from in the first place? They get it from experienced adults who also care enough to write these published papers, because they also have to cite these research papers they write for uni and stuff, right? So they get this from the older generation, rejected. They get this from the older generation as well. It's not that the older generation doesn't care, because they do. And there is a legal voting age for a reason. It's because you cannot deny the fact that the older generation is just more mature. You cannot. There is like a very small percentage of the younger generation that actually cares enough about this policy. Like, as my deputy leader of opposition has said, most teenagers do not care, and even if they are taught this, they will maybe absorb it for the exam, and then completely forget about it in the future. They don't care enough to, rejected later. They do not care enough to actually carry this out. And as you said, what Sarawak Eco Warriors, right? They only hold for the younger generation, because the older generation, they think they do not care. But do you not think this is a bit biased also? Like, they also have adult volunteers, right? It's not only the younger generation who's volunteering, and we're not saying that they cannot volunteer, or they cannot like speak their mind. As I've said, we're just stopping them from voting, because we think that the votes will be very skewed if it's like if like an entire generation just decides like, oh, we actually don't care, maybe we'll just troll and we'll vote for this thing because we actually don't really care what happens, right? But the older generation, they do have the incentive, because they do have to care about what will happen to the economy, and the prices will go up, and etc. etc. Okay, I'll take your POI now.
Clarify that we're not excluding adults from the vote, and we want to question why the people aren't getting their information from a random citizen. They're getting their information from climate scientists.
We are also I never mentioned that you guys were excluding the adults. Yes, we know you're all on your side. Everyone gets a chance to vote, right? I'm simply defending the fact that you say I'm simply defending the fact that you say that the older generation is less informed just because they don't have formal education. But on newspapers and stuff, the older generations are the one reading the news, and like Facebook, that's the older generation's form of social media, right? They still talk about climate change and etc. etc. I'm just proving our point that they do get information and that they are aware, and not that they are unaware like how you guys say, right? Okay. And you also say that we will always put environment last because we think about like our monetary income, but like that's not true. And the reason why actually these policies take so long to pass, don't you think that there is a reason why these policies take so long to pass? Because maybe it sounds like such a fresh idea, such a good idea in the beginning, but once they do more research down the road, which they have the resources to do more research on the road, they realize, hey, this might not be the best idea, this might not be the best decision we can make. Therefore, these policies do not pass. Not every single policy that comes in is a good idea, right? And with that, I believe side opposition has won this debate. Thank you.
Did you get reply speed from the?
No.
Can I get like 20 seconds?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, thank you.
I think I'll be done in a bit already.
Speech will start in 3, 2, 1. We as side of opposition firmly stand against letting these teenagers vote. Again, teenagers are unable to properly make decisions for themselves, or more for the country. Side government government is living in a fantasy world where all teenagers care about the environment because they do research papers. And wake up lah. Just because you've written a sejarah essay doesn't mean that you actually care about the topic, right? I'm sure if I give you like history or sejarah quiz right now, you're actually not going to be able to answer half of it unless you like, even if you study it, right? You don't actually really care about the topic. You're just studying it because it's part of your like school curriculum. So to rehash, teenagers should not vote on these topics because they are not fully mature or care enough about the topic. We have invited government to prove how their case stands when 1,000 youth environmental activists are pitted against 100,000 teenagers that just don't really care. So they claim that these teenagers will care because Sarawak Eco Warriors has a youth program. Hello, I really doubt that half of the people attending SSIDC are actually going to become environmental activists because of this program. So the whole case stands on the ground that teenagers care because there's like material to educate them in school. But then like, isn't a big majority of these teenagers just going to study it because it is in school and they're not actually really going to care about it? I know after you've graduated, you're going to go and become like a historian just because you've like read some sejarah essay or you've written some research paper about like what Hamtuade in the past. I really know what's going to happen, right? So with this, the whole case just falls apart. Whereas on our side, we already proved why 100,000 teenagers voting is just really bad, right? Because there's just not enough like people that actually, in teenagers, there's just not enough people that actually care about the environment and to like pit against the people that just don't care. Because teenagers, right, they're just gonna vote and then they're just gonna go home and play like video games, right? Or they're just gonna go home and like play basketball or whatever. They don't actually really care about the topic at hand, right? Even if a small like minority actually cares, on the like larger scale, right? We don't want like these random teenagers to just come and vote, right? If a teenager like truly cares, truly wants to express ideals, we already have social media. There's already youth environmental activists on social media that have pushed for change, right? As you have said already, there's youth that actually just like care about the environment. They go on social media, they attain a platform, then like people actually listen to them, right? Then when these adults they see the teenagers on social media, they think, hey, maybe this guy's right. Then when I go and vote, I'm going to vote like according to what I've learned, right? Because there are obviously there's going to be some teenagers that can actually make these intellectual decisions, that actually have matured very fast. But then on like the wider scale, right? The wide majority of teenagers, they just don't really care. They don't understand the long-term implications. They're just like there for the sake of being there, right? It's not like all of them just suddenly care because there's going to be like Go Green programs that go and promote to them. What's the incentive for them, for the teenagers, to actually listen to the Go Green program, to actually like actively go out and seek it? Maybe they think, oh, okay, I won't use plastic so much anymore. Then, I mean, that's like already going to be your best case scenario, right? Because a lot of teenagers just like don't really care. Maybe I stop using a plastic bottle, maybe I stop using straws, maybe it's like, oh, I saved the turtle. But then on the long term, right, I'm not actually going to like care so much, and I'm going to go research about like why when I vote to increase the carbon tax, then like the economy will like inflate, or like the bills will go up, the taxes will go up, the price of a product will increase. It's just like so false on so many levels, right? You're so prejudiced against the fact you believe that all teenagers just really care about environmental policies just because the material is there to educate them. But then this is just largely false on every single level, and on our side, we've already proven why a large amount of teenagers voting is not good, and if teenagers truly care about the environment, there are other platforms where they can express their ideals fully. With this, I would like to end my speech. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad to close the debate, Council Simon, there we go.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. On our side, we push for teenagers that use their voices currently on social media and to actually use those voices that they have so powerfully on social media and to actually use it in policy decision and to push policies. Now, 2 things I'll do in my speech. First of all, what were the main clashes and how we won them, and secondly, how their world is technically worse. Now, 3 main things that we talked about as to why we wanted teen voice to actually help push. First of all, we pointed out the fact that they're more innovative, that they're younger and they are more open-minded, and note that side opposition did not disprove the fact that they were more innovative. this point still stands, and if they concede that teenagers are indeed more innovative and are able to actually provide more fresh and bright ideas. Secondly, we talked about how teenagers were more informed with their emphasis on curricula pushed by, that is pushed currently in the education curriculum. Thirdly, we talked about how technically they have more experience compared to these older people that are actually the ones making the decisions on their side. What are the three main things that we pointed out which were their flaws in today's debate? First of all, that they aren't actually able to push for any change, correct? Their older people are actively outweighing their younger, fresh graduates, and therefore, because their older people have, for example, are more prone to climate change denial due to the reasons I stated before, because they are more stubborn, etc. We have said how that these older people are more likely to outweigh younger people and therefore aren't able to actually properly push for change. We also have pointed out how it is also like in the status quo, how it's harder, how their world is like the status quo where environmental policies take a long time to change. Thirdly, we say how older people actually lack experience within making or deciding, or they actually lack experience on the topic of environment. Now, note that they did not manage to disprove any of these points, and I'll tell you there's main problems. First of all, they don't tell us why it's better on their side. How are they actually better able to push for these environmental policies? Because their world is just the same as the status quo where older people still outweigh the younger people. They don't tell me why the older people are more why they don't tell me the incentives of the older people to actually properly change everything. When in the status quo where older people constantly outweigh the younger people, change still has not been made, right? We have pointed that out and we said that they aren't really changing anything currently, so why would they suddenly change everything on your side? Secondly, they just assume that they are able to get a better world on their side, and they don't clearly impact as to what impacts they're able to bring to the debate when they are trying to push for teenagers not to do it. When we have said that they said that not all teenagers care about this, correct? And we have of course not everyone is going to care about it, but you did point out how older people are more likely to care on your side. They didn't point that out. And also they talked about how these younger people, only 1,000 of them would care. But we say that even if we already pointed out how even if those 1,000 people care, they're still able to make a difference. Those extra, it's not going to be that small of a number. Of course, it's going to be probably 100, more than that. But then, even so, we have people that actually care on us, right? And they're adding to the number of people who care at the end of the day. Whereas on their side, the number of people who don't care outweighs the people who care, and therefore they aren't able to actually make any substantive change. But we are still able to increase the people we care, and we are better able to push for these voices. And yeah, thank you.
We have time for the rest of the debate. You guys may close the floor, shake hands, and leave the room as I deliver for a few minutes.